Today, we're saying goodbye to trusts. Here I've got the mapping and trusts section open on PySRV01, and we see that we've got one mapping for PySchool/student01 being mapped to PyAdmins. And over on the trusts section, we have two trusts. So a trust is essentially a mapping, but instead of mapping a Windows user account, it maps the hostname, application name, or IP address of a machine making a connection. There is a place to enter OS user and domain, but that's not authenticated and it shouldn't be used. Now, let's take a look at what these trusts do. The Proxy127 trust, we went over in the basics class, but it maps any connection from the IP address 127.0.0.1, so anything from the local machine, to the superuser, PyAdmin. We went over how this is a bad thing, and we don't want it. It's really only there by default, so you can implement your own security plan and then remove it afterwards. Now, the second trust here is also pretty concerning. And I've said a few times it kind of makes my heart skip a beat every time I see it. Remember how we completely changed interfaces from one interface to another version, and we really had no concern for the accounts we were running them under, and no concern if they were actually going to work? It's because of this trust. It just lets in anything from PyInt01 as a super user, and it just works. So it's a major concern for two reasons. One being that it's not just letting the interface in, but any connection from that machine. And two, because it's being mapped to the super user and not an identity which just has the permission to write to the interface tags. Now, using the principle of least privilege, our interface should only be able to write to the tags it's supposed to be writing to. Here, it can write to any tag. Also, I lied. There's two more reasons why I don't like this. Connections using trusts don't encrypt data over the wire, so this means that data sent by the interface can be seen and potentially interfered with before it reaches the PyData archive. Additionally, because trusts rely on network information and not proper authentication, they're vulnerable to spoofing attacks. This trust isn't just letting in everything from PyInt01, but any connection coming from a machine claiming to be PyInt01. So I guess it's good we have a fix, and our fix is to use mappings instead. But our interface isn't on the same domain as our data archive. That means that the data archive can't authenticate any Windows accounts originating from the interface machine. But we can use a workaround here, a Windows feature called Windows Credential Manager. I can almost guarantee that you've used Windows Credential Manager before, but probably without realizing it. Let's say you're trying to connect to some kind of service internally in your company. This service isn't integrated with your Active Directory, so it uses its own usernames and passwords. You try to connect, your browser tries to use your credentials first, and it fails. It then has a little pop-up saying, "What credentials would you like to use?" You type in the credentials for your special internal service, and then afterwards it says, "Would you like to save those credentials?" If you say yes, it actually saves them into Windows Credential Manager. Then, next time you connect, Windows Credential Manager sees that you're trying to connect to this specific service. It uses the saved credentials instead of your Windows credentials. So essentially, Windows Credential Manager is swapping out your credentials for a set of saved credentials instead when you're connecting to a particular server. We're going to take advantage of that. Here's our plan of attack. We create a PyIdentity that the interface will use. Next, we create a mapping from a domain servers account that our IT department has created for us. In this case, PySchool/PyService-PyInt01. Now, this is an account with a username and password. It's not a group managed service account. We edit our PyPoints so this new identity has access to them. Next, we'll move over to the interface machine and change the buffer and interface to run under a different local service account. Then we'll teach this local service account the credentials to the domain service account and tell it to always use those credentials when it's connecting to PySRV01. That way, both our buffer and interface will now authenticate using Windows credentials on the domain, even though they're coming from a machine that is off the domain. Next, we'll completely disable trusts on the PyData archive, and I'll finally be happy. Okay, let's do it. We're on PyInt01. Before we configure this interface authentication, we're going to take a look at how our administrator is authenticating. So when we're on the interface machine, how are we authenticating to the PyData archive when we open the ICU, say? We're going to test this connection using the PySDK utility. So click on Start from PyInt01, scroll down to PySystem, and open up PySDK utility. This is a test utility that allows you to make a connection and look at log files. So here we are. We have one PyData archive that the interface machine knows about. We're going to check the checkbox and try to connect. And we're connecting using a PyTrust as PyAdmin. That's because, as we saw before, our data archive trusts every connection coming from this interface machine. Doesn't matter what application it's coming from, it's always mapped to the super user. If we go to our data archive, we'd like to start using this Windows mapping. So the mapping to our student01 user on the domain from our interface machine. We're going to use Windows Credential Manager first to map the account we're logged in as through to this domain account. So let's open up a command prompt on the interface machine. So go to PyInt01, click Start, type in cmd, and open up a command prompt. Inside this command prompt, we're going to type a command that teaches PyInt01 when we're logged in as the account we're logged in as, which is actually a local account called student01, to always use the domain student01 account when it connects to the PyData archive. So this command we're going to run is add a credential for pysrv01.pyschool.int, and note we're using the fully qualified domain name. In our current network, it doesn't allow us to route using just the machine name. We need to use the FQDN, fully qualified domain name. So we're adding a credential to connect to the data archive using the user pyschool/student01. So that's our domain admin account, and a password that I've got here. Now note that I've blurred out this password. You need to type in the password for your learning environment. It would have been emailed to you, or it'll be showing on the virtual machine user interface. Credential added successfully. Now, let's test it. We're going to disconnect. Note that we're connecting as PyTrust as PyAdmin now. Disconnect and reconnect. So now we're connecting as PySchool/student01 as PyAdmins. We're using domain credentials now when we're connecting here. So just to make this a little more clear, I'm going to type this command in the command window. Who am I? This command window is being run by a user called student01. It's a local user on this machine. This is the user we're logged in as. We've added that credential for that specific server. So whenever this user attempts to connect to that server, it's going to use the saved credentials. We're going to do the same thing for the interface. We need to do a little bit of preparation first though. So first up, we're going to make an identity for this interface to use. Let's go to PySRV01. And we're going to go to Identities, Users, and Groups. We're going to make a new identity for this interface and buffer to use when it connects to the PyData archive. So I'm going to click on New Identity at the top, This identity will have the same name as the interface point source, just to keep things organized. We type in pyint01-opc. I'm going to type in a description. Create. Next step is to change the security for all of our points so this identity can write to the points. Let's open up Microsoft Excel. Would like a blank workbook. And we're going to go to PyBuilder. Go to PyPoints. Find PyPoints. Find points by point source. So we're going to click on this drop down here and type in our point source. This will grab all the points associated with our interface, including all of the health points we created as well. And OK. We're going to only select the security columns because that's all we need to change. So I'm going to clear all, find security, and include the data security and point security columns. And OK. Here we go. Next, I need to add in our new identity here. So data security, the identity will need to be able to write to the data of the points. This should give it write access. And we'll need read access to the point security. After we've modified those two top columns, I'm just going to use Excel's autofill to stretch them down. Make sure it's not incrementing or doing anything strange. Okay, looks pretty good to me. Let's publish. We're going to go to the publish button and we're in edit mode. Okay. So now our interface and buffer should be able to have access once we configure that interaction with Windows Credential Manager. One last step here is to make a mapping for our identity. So we have this identity that the interface is going to use when it writes to the points. We need to make a mapping to it for the account that our interface is going to log in with. So here's our mappings and trusts. We're going to make a new mapping. Here we're typing in PySchool, PyService, PyInt01. This is a service account that's been created for us for this reason. Note that this is a real service account. It's not a group managed service account. It's got a real username and password. You're not able to do this Windows credential mapping with group managed service accounts. And we're mapping it to the identity we just created. So I'm going to choose from the ellipsis, pyint01 OBC. Okay. Let's move over to our interface machine. Now it's time to make this Windows Credential Manager entry. Note that we made this Windows Credential Manager entry here for the logged in user using a command prompt. We're going to make another one for the account that we're going to run the interface as. We're going to run a command prompt as a different user. So I'm right-clicking on the command prompt right down at the bottom, and then shift right-click on this command prompt dialog, and then we're going to click on Run as Different User. The user I'm going to run this as is the account that I'm planning on running the interface and the buffer as. This account has already been created on this machine by our IT and by an administrator. Local-py interface, Password here is written in the course notes just to the side. That starts up. Just to be certain, I like to run the whoami command. Sometimes I don't know who I am. Okay, I am apparently piant01/local PyInterface. On this other command window, I'm piant01/student01. Okay, so now we can do the same command key command and map this local PyInterface, or teach it, the domain credentials for the interface service account. And there we go. Note that once I press enter here, there's no checking if these credentials are correct or not. So if you end up following this and it doesn't work, most likely you have these credentials wrong. Now, just to the side of this video, we have the correct credentials that you'll need to use everywhere. Note that we'll try to keep them the same as what I've typed in here, but they may change over time. Always use the credentials in the video notes rather than what I'm typing in here. Okay. Now, our service account knows the correct credentials when it's logging in to the PyData archive. Next, we need to change the account that's running the buffer and the interface to this service account. Before we do that, we need to give the account permission to run the buffer. Go and click on Start, and then type in lusrmgr.msc, and then enter. We're going to go into Groups and PyBuffering Administrators. Double click on that, and then add the local PyInterface account. Okay. I'm going to apply this and then leave this open because we're going to remove the old account after we finish changing it over. Now I'm going to go into Services, find the buffer subsystem, right-click and Properties, and then change the account that it runs under. So log on, browse for accounts, local PyInterface, okay. Password is the password for the local PyInterface account. You'll see it in the video notes. It's been granted login as a service right. That's great. And okay. And okay. Let's change the account for the interface as well. So this pyopc int underscore read only 1. Now I've made these changes. The next thing I'd like to do is restart the buffer and see what account it uses to connect. Now I'm comfortable doing this because I've still got that incredibly insecure trust over on the data archive side. It doesn't really matter what account I run the buffer as, it'll work nonetheless, but I want to restart it and see what credentials it uses to connect and make sure I've made that Windows Credential Manager entry work. And golden rule, whenever I'm going to do any interface or buffer maintenance, I'm going to get a scrolling log open so I know what's going on. So I'm going to open up the PyInterface configuration utility and click on that scrolling log button. And now we're going to restart the PyBuffer subsystem. So right click and restart. Would we like to restart the OPC interface as well? Yes. Note that you will get a little bit of data loss here. Whenever you restart an interface, it does cause data loss because the interface is not running for a few seconds. Some interfaces take up to a couple of minutes to restart, depending on how many tags they need to load. Okay, Let's go to our PyData archive and see. First off, I should really be having my data here. So I'm going to search for all the data for the interface again and make sure it's still flowing. Okay, we're still getting data. It's a good sign. Let's go to Operation and then Network Managed Statistics. We'll go down and find our buffer. So here's PyBuffSS and scroll along. Okay, looks like our buffer is now using this identity we set up. Our interface, though, is still using the PyAdmin trust. That's because interfaces can't use mappings unless you install the PyAPI for Windows Integrated Security. This hasn't been installed on the interface machine yet. We're going to install it now. So now I'm sure that it'll work because the buffer works. The interface has the same security settings. We're going to install it and it should work. Let's go. We're going to go to the interface machine and we're going to go into PyInstallKits and we're going to run this PyAPI 2018. Right click, run as administrator. Okay. We see a big warning. Now, in the basics course, I told you, don't worry about the warning because it was a new system. Here, we're upgrading an old system. We really should read this warning. So this warning is saying, before you upgrade, you need to have your mapping sorted out. We just did that. In fact, we've confirmed the buffer subsystem actually connects using the new mapping. We're just doing this upgrade because interfaces need the new API version. So we're going to install here. And then it'll be a next affair from here. Okay, looks like it's done. And we need to reboot to finish. Now, if you've got an interface already running, most likely it will ask you to reboot. So again, this means more data loss, but we can't get around it. We're going to select yes here and wait for it to reboot. Now, while that's happening, I'm going to go over to my data archive, to my current values, and then note that the values are not updating right now because the interface is restarting. They'll start updating soon. Now, another note here is if we had interface redundancy set up, like we had in the basics course, we could do this upgrade on one machine and then do the upgrade on the other machine. We'd be able to do it without getting any data loss. So moral of the story here is always have interface redundancy configured. And our data's started to update again. So it looks like our interface is back up. Let's see if we can actually log in. Okay. And while that's logging in, I'm going to go back to the data archive. I'm going to go to Network Manager Statistics and then see how it's connecting. I'm going to scroll down here and looks like we have OPC and PyBuffSS connecting here through the identity Pyindo1-OPC. So both are now connecting through identities and not that trust. And over here in my trust column, I have nothing. Nothing is connecting using a trust in my whole Pi system. That means I can remove trusts completely. Now to do that, we need to go down to security settings and slide the slider all the way up. Note that this change requires a restart of the base subsystem. I'm not going to do that right now, but next time this server reboots, it will no longer support connections using trusts. And with that, we've secured our interface. We've made it significantly harder for any miscreants to get in with simple spoofing attacks. And we've also lowered the impact. In the previous lesson, we installed the read-only version of the interface. So if anyone managed to get in, they wouldn't be able to write back to the control system by simply creating a tag.